UFC 294 betting and DraftKings show. We have 13 fights this weekend, $200,000 to first place on DraftKings. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. Kicking things off in the middleweight division, we have Nurmagomedov, a minus 290 favorite. The comeback on Bruno Silva is plus 235. And right off the bat, this is one where I think the favorite probably wins, but I think the underdog is live for an upset and has potential round one finish on DraftKings. And that's kind of the theme of this card, where I think it's a super favorite heavy card, super chalky card. You see a lot of big favorites up and down the card. I do think most of the favorites end up winning, but there's at least 3 or 4 of these fights where the underdog is very live. And I think that's the case here with Bruno Silva, who's historically not very trustworthy. You can definitely take advantage of him in terms of the grappling. He's been submitted 7 times in his career, and the durability is kind of so-so as well. We've seen him rocked, but he does have that power. 20 of his 23 wins have come by knockout, and if it comes, it's probably coming early. Now, on the flip side, Nurmagomedov is a UFC debutant fighter, 11-0 prospect fighting out of Russia. And despite the Magomedov last name, he's actually more of a striker. 10 of his 11 wins have come by knockout. And he wants to keep the fight on the feet, keep the fight at range, because he is very powerful with his kicking attack. He will throw kicks nonstop from the opening bell. He'll throw them repeatedly and nonstop throughout the fight. Very powerful kicks. So this is one where Silva is not only going to have to be mindful of those kicks, but he's going to have to punish him for those kicks, close distance, make it ugly, and land one of his big punches. Can that happen? Yes, I think so. But I think the more likely outcome, the majority of the time this fight plays out, Magomedov, the cardio seems to check out. He keeps a high pace and he's going to keep throwing, as I mentioned. So I think the cardio and the pace is eventually going to break Silva down the stretch here. We're going Magomedov by TKO. That's the official pick, but I'm going to have exposure to both sides on DraftKings. Next fight up, we have Victoria Dudova, a minus 470 favorite with the comeback on Jinh Yu Frey at plus 360. And once again, I mentioned it's going to be the theme of the card. I think this is one where the underdog probably makes the fight more competitive than a plus 360 underdog would suggest. But at the same time, I just don't see how Jinh Yu Frey wins this fight. She's primarily a Muay Thai striker, okay striker, doesn't throw in volume, gets hit way too much. And even though statistically she's shown good takedown defense, she just hasn't really faced a ton of fighters that are looking to take her down. And the ones that she has faced, they just haven't been very physical, not good wrestlers whatsoever. Polyana Viana, Vanessa Demopoulos, the list goes on, Kay Hansen, and some of them were able to get her down. I think Dudova is physical enough and is going to be able to get the takedowns. I think that's the biggest edge in this fight. Dudova, former Contender Series fighter, primarily a grappler, and I do think eventually she's going to be able to peel Jinh Yu Frey to the ground and get the submission. So we're going Dudova by submission. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have Nathaniel Wood, a minus 325 favorite. The comeback on Muhammadjon Naimov is plus 260. And you guys know, if you've been listening to me for a while, I'm a Nathaniel Wood guy. I've bet on him multiple times in the past. He's been good to us in the past. And I like the guy as a fighter. I really do. But in terms of the matchup, I think the one leak in Wood's game, because I think from a technical standpoint, there's no argument here. He's just better everywhere than Muhammadjon Naimov. But the one leak in his game is that durability. We have seen his chin get checked multiple times in the past. He's been knocked out twice in his career. So if Naimov were to pull off the upset here, he's primarily just a big one-punch power guy. We saw that play out in his UFC debut, where he was kind of getting dominated by Jamie Malarkey until he landed that one big shot, and that was enough for the upset victory. Now, that could always happen here. I just think 9 times out of 10, it doesn't, and Nathaniel Wood just outclasses him here. The bigger question is, do you want to pay $9K for Nathaniel Wood on DraftKings? I don't think you can fully fade him, because I know his last 5 fights have gone to decision. Historically, he's more of a decision guy. But prior to that, he was getting finishes early on in the UFC. I know that was at 135, but I think he does have a big submission grappling advantage here over Naimov if he were to choose that route. Now, he's usually more content to just slug it out on the feet, and that's fine. But you're also just giving Naimov the only chance that he would have to beat you is on the feet. So I think if you play Wood, it's a tournament play. He's probably going to be lower owned in that expensive price range. He does have a ceiling if he chooses to grapple. I'm just not convinced that he will. So I think it's going to be Nathaniel Wood by decision. That's the official pick, which brings us to our next fight in the lightweight division as Anshul Jubli comes in as a minus 278 favorite. The comeback on Mike Breeden is plus 225. And we'll start on the Jubli side. He's a former road to UFC fighter. He fought in that tournament. That's how he was signed to the UFC, came through as a big underdog in that tournament, and then of course won his UFC debut over another road to UFC fighter, Jekka Saragi, who just turned out wasn't very good. But I do think Jubli at least answered some questions for me. I did have concerns about his cardio. It seemed to check out fine in that fight, and it doesn't mean that it's always going to check out, but I do think it's not as bad as maybe I thought it was going to be. He comes from like an Indian wrestling background, and I do think he would have a substantial grappling edge in this fight, and I think that's the best path to victory for him here against Mike Breeden, who's primarily just an early power puncher. 8 of his 10 wins have come by knockout. He's 0-3 in the UFC and was finished in 2 of those. So Breeden has that big punch, yes, but he's always had issues defensively grappling. And he's also been knocked out 3 times in his career. So the chin's not even that good either. I don't think Jubli really has the type of power to expose the durability issues, but I do think he has the wrestling to expose the grappling issues. So even though I think Breeden could be live here because we just still have some unknowns on the Jubli side, maybe it turns out he's just not very good and Breeden just like rocks him on the feet. It wouldn't be that crazy to me, but I do think the wrestling, the takedowns are going to be there for Jubli, and I think that's probably how he gets it done. So we're going Jubli by decision as the official pick, and this is another good fight to target on DraftKings. Next up, we have Cedriques Dumas, a minus 180 favorite. The comeback on Abu Aitar is plus 150. And we'll start on the Dumas side. You guys probably recognize that name because he's another former Contender Series fighter, and we faded him big time with Josh Fremd. He'll always be goated for that Fremd performance. And then Dumas came back, and shout out to the guys that were able to look past the Fremd performance and hop on Dumas as a big dog because he cashed for them at Cody Brundage. I unfortunately was not one of those people, but he looked okay in that fight. It was more so Cody Brundage just giving him top position for free, I think. Brundage pulling guillotine like he always does, and Dumas just kind of laid on him. Didn't really do a ton, to be honest with you. So I don't even think that performance was all that great. And I'm always skeptical when we see guys like Dumas, who I think have clear holes in their game as sizable favorites against guys with UFC experience, and that fits this bill against Abu Aitar. The reason why I'm not like windmill dunking Aitar here, and I am still considering backing Aitar, and I'm going to have a lot of him on DraftKings at 7,800. The one reason, well, 2 reasons why I'm not windmill dunking him in this spot is because he's now 37 years old. He never really fights all that often, coming off a long layoff, coming off a knockout loss. The durability I don't think is really there anymore. Probably coming off steroids as well. This is a guy that's had, issues in the past and a USADA suspension as well. But he does still have power. The guy's a decent striker. 7 of his 14 wins have come by knockout. So that's the upside case, is where Dumas, I don't know if he can cover this type of price tag if he's not going to choose to grapple. I think he could probably just like out athlete Aitar at this stage in his career, and I do think there could be some openings for that infamous Dumas head kick that we saw a lot on the regional scene. So that's why, in terms of a pick, I am going to go with the favorite in Dumas. But as I already mentioned, I'm going to be overweight to Aitar on DraftKings as the underdog. He's one of my favorite underdog picks this week. Next up, we have Javid Basharat, a minus 550 favorite. The comeback on Victor Henry is plus 410. And this is one where I think it stands out in terms of DraftKings because Basharat's 9,400, and he just sticks out like a sore thumb to me as a guy who is just a substantially worse play than the guys priced around him. Because when he's this expensive, you really need not just 100 plus, but probably even 110 on a slate like this. And I just don't see that coming from Basharat, I don't even think he's scored 100 yet in the UFC. And it's not that it's impossible to do so, but in terms of the matchup, I just struggle to see how that happens here against a guy like Victor Henry, who statistically lands more volume than Basharat. So I think both of these guys are going to be landing in volume. Both of these guys are going to be swinging. And Henry has okay takedown defense. Yes, he's been taken down at least once in all of his fights, but he's going to make you work for it. Basharat's not like super aggressive in getting the fight to the ground. He averages around 2 takedowns per 15 minutes. I do think Basharat's the cleaner striker, particularly defensively. That's where I think he's going to have a big advantage, and I think the leg kicks are going to be a factor for him at range here. So I do think he's the better round winner. He's better defensively, and he's got a more well-rounded skill set in this matchup. So I am going to pick him to win, but I think Henry could keep it competitive enough to where we just don't see this big blowout on the Basharat side in order for him to pay off that price tag on DraftKings. So we're going Javid Basharat by decision. That's the official pick, but I'm going to be looking to fade him on DraftKings. Next fight up in the lightweight division, we have Trevor Peek, a minus 166 favorite now. The comeback on Muhammad Yahya is plus 140. And this is one that's very interesting to me because we literally just saw Trevor Peek in his last fight be like 40% owned on DraftKings in the mid-range, and he lost the fight, and his opposing fighter was the optimal fighter in Jose Chepe Mariscal. And now we're setting up for another spot where Trevor Peek is going to be mega chalk, probably north of 40% owned on DraftKings because nobody wants to play Yahya, and Yahya's probably going to get knocked out, and Trevor Peek's so popular. And I actually do agree, like the pick is going to be Peek by knockout, but it's the leverage that gets me always interested in terms of large field tournaments on DraftKings because, like I said, all we would need to play out is, and obviously Mariscal's a much, much better fighter than Yahya, but all we would need to happen is literally that. Peek doesn't get the first round knockout. He starts to fade. Yahya is a guy that's landed multiple takedowns across his fights. He doesn't seem to be a huge threat standing to me. His striking's okay, but it's very generic. Doesn't seem to have a lot of power despite the 7 knockout victories. He is the former UAE lightweight champion, but the level of competition wasn't really all that great. So he's not like some stud, but he is fighting in front of his home crowd here. Maybe if he can withstand the early storm, then I think he's live to take over in rounds 2 and round 3 if he can go to that grappling, get the takedowns, if we think Peek starts to fade. But I think more than likely it does probably end with Peek just bombing on this dude because he does have issues defensively in terms of the striking. We've seen like low-level regional guys really kind of tee off on him when they start to pressure him. So I just really think Peek's going to be landing those big hammers and does get the knockout finish. But I'll say it again, in large field tournaments, I am going to embrace some shares of Yahya just because I think he's going to be one of the lower owned fighters on the slate. You're getting that extra leverage if you were to win, just because I do expect Peek to be one of the most popular fighters this week. But the official pick is going to be Peek by TKO. Next fight up, we have Muhammad Mokayev, a minus 455 favorite. The comeback on Tim Elliott is plus 360. And this seems like Tim Elliott could be like the trappy value play to me, one of them, because I think there's probably multiple this week. But I think Tim Elliott is probably one of them because, you know, guys remember years ago when he was breaking DraftKings scoring with so many takedowns, reversals, advances, etc. But I just don't think that that's really going to happen much here. I think, yeah, he could probably land a takedown or two. He's landed at least one takedown in his last 9 fights. And we know he's such a good wrestler that he is going to be scrambling and winning some positions against a guy like Mokayev, who Malcolm Gordon was able to win some positions against and reverse him as well. And Mokayev's still young. He's still getting better, still improving. But I think more than likely, Mokayev actually has upside for like 8 to 10 takedowns in this spot, because even though we mentioned the offensive wrestling ability of Tim Elliott, he's going to be willing to go to the mat with Mokayev. He's going to give up those takedowns. He always does. I think it's going to happen repeatedly. And I don't think Mokayev's going to have a ton of success in terms of holding him down. And I think there's going to be a ton of scrambles. But that's why I think Mokayev's just going to be able to keep mat returning Tim Elliott here and really rack up those DraftKings points, which we need from him at 9,600 as the most expensive fighter on the slate. But I actually do think he gets there. And the last thing that I'll say is Tim Elliott always gets overconfident in his abilities on the mat to where he puts himself in bad spots just due to that overconfidence. I think doing that against Mokayev's going to make him pay. I think Tim Elliott's been subbed multiple times in his career. He loves to give his neck up, loves to put himself in bad spots, and we know how aggressive Mokayev is with hunting submissions on the mat. So I do think he actually gets it here. We're going Mokayev by submission. That's the official pick. And kicking off the pay-per-view main card, we have Said Nurmagomedov, a minus 205 favorite. The comeback on Muin Gafarov is plus 170. And this is one where I really wanted to take the dog shot here. You guys know, if you've been listening to me for a couple years, that I like Gafarov. I bet him on Contender Series. He lost a split decision to Chad and Hellinger, and I was happy to see him re-sign to the UFC, gave a good account of himself on his short notice debut, but didn't get there. And I don't think he can get there again here, because even though, despite me liking some of his ability, two-time former Combat Sambo world champion, decent enough grappler, aggressive wrestler, lands multiple takedowns in just about all of his fights, except his last one, but he's never really had good control when he gets guys down. Going back to that Ann Helliger fight, he popped back to his feet multiple times. That's happened to him across the regional scene in a couple of his fights, but he does have power on the feet as well. He's a good striker. I worry about the chin. I don't think his durability is all that there. We've seen him rocked a couple times over his last couple fights, and even though his cardio seemed to be on point last time, it was an issue in that Ann Helliger fight. And so I'm just not 100% sold on his cardio either, even though he's going up against a guy in Nurmagomedov who does tend to fade as the fight goes on. The problem is, I think Nurmagomedov has knockout upside. I think Nurmagomedov has submission upside, because one thing that I even said in the Ann Helliger breakdown a couple years ago in that Contender Series video is that Gafarov always sticks his head where it doesn't belong. Similar to a guy like Tony Gravely. He gets sloppy on those takedowns. He leaves his neck out there. If you do that against a guy like Said, he's going to snatch up the neck. This dude has a nasty guillotine. I've talked crap about him in the past about not being a good round winner because he's low volume. He throws a bunch of spinning stuff, can be taken down, but he's got a very good guillotine, very slick with the early submissions. If he jumps on his neck early, I think he's going to get him out of there. So we're going to go Said Nurmagomedov by submission as the official pick. But in terms of DraftKings, I do think there's probably better fighters to target in that range, just because if that early finish doesn't materialize, Said's never been a high volume guy. If he doesn't get the finish, or if it doesn't come early, I think it's just not going to be enough to outscore some of the other fighters in his range. So Nurmagomedov by submission is the official pick, but don't love the play when it comes to DraftKings. Next fight up, we have Warlley Alves moving up on short notice to the middleweight division to replace Nasruddin Imavov to take on Ikram Aliskerov. And I really liked Imavov in that spot, so unfortunately we don't get to see that fight play out. So now we have Aliskerov, who's a massive favorite over Warlley Alves, and I totally get it. I mean, Aliskerov definitely has some holes in his game, but I think only some of the better fighters in this division will be able to take advantage of that. He's a multiple-time Combat Sambo world champion. He's best when he's at his grappling. He has power in his hands as well, as we saw in his last fight, but he's a guy that's typically going to go to his grappling. His only professional loss came against Khamzat Chimaev, who's also fighting on this card we'll get to later. But Warlley Alves, even though he does have some early finishing potential, I think it's not as likely here at 185 pounds, not with a full camp. And he's known to have cardio issues himself, kind of being a quitter. I don't really trust him in this spot. I don't think he could take advantage of the striking issues that Aliskerov presents. So I think over time, Aliskerov's just going to break this dude. I think he's going to take him down multiple times and get a finish in rounds 2 or round 3. So that's the way I'm going to look to target it in the betting market. Maybe Aliskerov by rounds 2 or 3 TKO, like the FanDuel combo bets that they offer there. I love betting those. I think that probably has value. And maybe even the rounds 2 or round 3 submission as well. I'm not sure how it's going to come, but I do think Aliskerov breaks him down the stretch and gets his hand raised. He's a solid target. He's expensive, but he should pay off that salary on DraftKings as well. Up next in the light heavyweight division, we have Magomed Ankalaev, a minus 360 favorite. The comeback on Johnny Walker is plus 285. And I do like Johnny Walker as one of my heavier owned underdogs this weekend. That's what I'm assuming. I haven't built any teams yet, but I do like him as an underdog on DraftKings for the potential upside for a couple of reasons. For starters, we know Johnny Walker has that, big explosive athleticism. He's got multiple round 1 knockouts on his record. He's got that mean type of upside for DraftKings. And then on the flip side, he's also going to have a 7-inch reach advantage over Ankalaev, who we've seen multiple times now just not separate himself in terms of his round winning ability. Even though he's very skilled, and I think he's the much more skilled fighter in this fight, he's way more well-rounded as well. I really just don't like the way that he fights, because even when he has big advantages over these guys, we see him go to competitive decisions with guys that he should be washing. And even in his last fight against Jan Blachowicz, I thought he won, but it ended up being a draw because it speaks to that. He wins on thin margins. He doesn't throw high volume. And even though he can take a lot of these guys down, he's usually not aggressive in doing so. So it's like, are you really winning these rounds that convincingly that bad judges might give it to the other guy? Obviously he's not. So in a fight where I think it could be kind of low volume, stay on the outside, Johnny Walker could land some leg kicks like Jan was able to do and hurt the legs of Ankalaev. It could be pretty subjective on who's winning these rounds. I do expect if Walker doesn't get that round 1 finish, I do think this fight goes over. I think we could see it go to a decision where it doesn't look that good on DraftKings, but I also see the bull case where it's like Ankalaev does go to the wrestling because Walker is easy to take down and can get controlled on the mat. If Ankalaev goes with an aggressive grappling style game plan, he could pay off that 9,100 price tag. So I'm going to have exposure to him as well. But I do like the Johnny Walker side. I lean that the fight goes to decision, but I'm going to have enough exposure where if that round 1 finish does materialize, I'm not dead either way. And just a little tidbit as well, his last 13 fights for Johnny Walker, if they haven't ended in round 1 on either side, it's gone to a full decision the whole way. So it's kind of just speaks to his style where he's got that meme round 1 potential. But if he doesn't get that, it kind of just turns into a boring, low volume fight where he just kind of plays it safe because of his durability issues. He's been knocked out so many times. Which brings us to our co-main event in the middleweight division, as Khamzat Chimaev comes in as a minus 305 favorite and Kamaru Usman is on the comeback at plus 245. And as you know, this was originally supposed to be Paulo Costa. Usman took the fight on short notice, replacing Costa, moving up to the middleweight division. Now, Khamzat Chimaev, it was expected that he was moving up to the middleweight division. He struggled to make 170, really bad in the Gilbert Burns fight. His last fight against Kevin Holland was at a catchweight. So this was coming for a while for Chimaev. So I do expect him to be the bigger, more natural 185er in there. Whereas Usman moving up on short notice and coming off the title shot loss at welterweight against Leon Edwards, the rematch back in March. Now, what's concerning to me on the Usman side is now he's 36 years old. He's always had knee issues dating back for a while, but especially the last couple of years where it's really started to bother him. And honestly, that last performance against Edwards was kind of a red flag. Not the first one where it was the head kick, he was winning and he got knocked out. I'm not going to put too much stock into that, but the rematch is where I think we're still really starting to see a decline on the Usman side. Not that he's not a great fighter still and that he can't win, but it was concerning to me. The biggest thing being is that he just didn't seem to have really anything in terms of the striking for Leon Edwards there. This is a guy that previously I was so high on because it wasn't just the wrestling that he can go to, it was his striking. You know, Trevor Whitman in his corner, you are a champion because of your jab. He had one of the best jabs in the welterweight division. His 1-2 rarely missed when he fought guys like Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal. His striking was on point, and I just didn't see that against Leon Edwards at all in the rematch. It was just like he didn't even want to stand with him. And then when he was going to the wrestling, he struggled to get the takedowns, didn't have a ton of control, just seemed like one of those desperation like wrestlers that just didn't really have any plan B and didn't do much with the takedowns when he got them. So that's why it was concerning to me. And now taking this fight on short notice, getting older, didn't look good in his last fight, going up against a guy like Khamzat Chimaev, who's younger, more explosive, more durable, more powerful. I don't know, man. It seems like Usman, it could be like I mentioned with Elliott, the value trap play of the week, because part of me wants to think that Usman is live here. When you have two good wrestlers, sometimes it turns into a striking match, and the Usman of old is a better striker than Khamzat Chimaev. But this at this stage, and what I saw in the Edwards fight, I don't know if I'd go there, man. And I think Chimaev's probably more powerful. We've seen Usman's durability kind of come into question now as well. I just think it's a spot where Khamzat Chimaev is going to be able to use that athleticism advantage and that physicality in those grappling exchanges or in the striking. I think he could land some big shots as well. I just think it's one where a lot of people are going to get sucked up into thinking Usman is super live here, going to be a big test for Chimaev. But I kind of think that Chimaev just handles him, to be honest with you, and I don't think the fight goes the full 15 minutes. If this fight was a 5-rounder for the belt, then I could make more of a case for Usman with that cardio edge. But just being 3 rounds, I think the cardio is fine for Chimaev. He's going to be fine here, and I think he gets the finish. So we're going Chimaev by submission. That's the official pick, and he's an obvious target on DraftKings. Which brings us to our title fight in the lightweight division, as Islam Makhachev comes in as a -278 favorite. The comeback on Alexander Volkanovski is +225. Volkanovski is also stepping in on short notice to replace Charles Oliveira, who suffered an injury in training, had to pull out of the fight. So now we're getting the immediate rematch. Of course, these guys just fought, 6 months ago or whatever it was. And it ended up being kind of how I expected it to play out. The grappling was the difference in terms of Makhachev. He ended up winning a decision, but the fight played out closer than I expected to, and that's credit to Volkanovski. I knew he's a great striker. He's a dog, cardio for days, defensive grappling is on point. He made Makhachev work for everything in that fight, and he knocked him down and had moments of success on the feet. So, and even in the grappling at times as well, he wasn't bad. So I think Volkanovski is always a live dog because you can never count him out. But the downside is, there were a lot of intangibles that were in his favor in that fight. For starters, he had a full camp. He was fighting in front of a home crowd. Now he's going to Abu Dhabi to fight in front of Makhachev's home crowd, essentially. And he doesn't have a full camp. He recently had a kid, I believe, as well. He had some type of surgery on his arm. There's a lot of reasons why I could see him not performing up to expectation as much as he did in his last fight, because last fight I thought he overperformed expectation, at least to me, and Makhachev still won. I bet Makhachev by submission in that fight, and even though it came close, Volkanovski's defense was just on point and he wasn't able to get it. I don't know if that's going to be the case this time around. I'm going right back to the well. I think Makhachev, it's the grappling that's on point. I think he wins this fight even more convincingly than he did last time, and I think he gets it done by submission. So we're going Makhachev by submission. That's the official pick. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings broken down by salary tier. It'll have my ownership projections as well. It's completely free. I'll pin it in the comments. 10 a.m. start time, so we got an early Saturday card. Best of luck. We'll see you guys next time.